Couple of things real quick before I get into the message this morning. We're headed to the land of Ur, in case you haven't figured that out by now with it being up there. So I'll help you as we navigate our journey to Ur, or away from Ur, actually. I probably listen to the news too much. I probably look at Twitter too much. I probably am on Facebook too much. I'm here to tell you that. I confess to you that I look at that stuff too much. But one of the things that just struck me during that song, so many people are complaining about what other people should be doing. If you're complaining, let me ask you, are you praying for those folks? Are you spending time in prayer for those who are in a position to help us out instead of complaining about them? I think as people of Christ, we need to be praying for them. That or either run for office or get a medical degree and you go to the work. So, and then people will complain about you. So, we need to lift them up in prayer. And they're also, they just need that. We don't know what all they deal with in all levels of government, on both sides of the aisle. All right, they need our prayers, and we need to be lifting them up. Have you heard the hype? I mean, it's all over TV, it's all over radio, it's all over the internet. We're flooded with all these extravagant claims made by advertisers trying to sell us the latest and greatest new things that are going to completely transform our lives. I mean, you've heard these kind of things. This is the greatest product you'll ever buy. This product is revolutionary. You've never seen anything like this. This will change your life. This is the greatest ever. This is the deal of a lifetime. But wait, there's more. You heard all of that? I mean, these folks are some serious hype people. I mean, they can get people all ready for this. Advertisers, they spend millions of dollars to entice us into thinking that if we buy more and more of their products, we're going to be happier and more fulfilled and more comfortable. I mean, all of these products, they make these claims that for just a few more dollars, you're guaranteed to have more happiness. You can have more friends. You can experience the good life. That if you will just do what these advertisers say and buy what they tell you to buy, they're inviting you to the land of Ur. Your teeth will be whiter. Your breath will smell better. Your coffee will be hipper. Your bank account will be richer. Your hair will be prettier. Your house will be bigger. Your car will be faster. Your clothes will be trendier. Your food can be tastier. Your vacations will be excitinger. Well, I was losing it, so I had to make up one. Oh, and you'll find more toilet paper. Somebody's going to have to sit me down and explain that one to me at some point. I don't get it. But anyway, see, people get trapped in the land of Ur. They're thinking that that being in the land of Ur is going to give them a peace and a contentment and a hope that they're missing in their lives. See, the sad reality is that talk is cheap. And too often we realize that these promises are hollow and they're a long way from the truth. See, Luke tells us about an encounter that Jesus had with someone who wanted to go to the land of Ur. One day Jesus was speaking to a large crowd, and the crowd was so big, the scripture even tells us, in Luke 12, it tells us that the people were falling all over themselves, trampling all over themselves to get to where they could hear Jesus. And the message that Jesus had for the folks, he was telling them, you need to be careful. There's a group out there called the Pharisees, and you need to be careful because these religious leaders, they're not teaching you right, and you need to listen to me. So the Pharisees, they were being hypocrites. They instead of teaching people how to get closer to God, these Pharisees were living in the land of Ur. They wanted more power. They wanted to be richer. And these power-hungry imposters, they were not devoted religious leaders. See, Jesus told the people that the messages of the Pharisees were not to be trusted. And contrary to what the Pharisees were teaching, he told them not to worry about their wealth. See, Jesus told them that if God cared so much about the little birds that were flying around, doesn't he care even more about you people? That's what Jesus said to them. He told the people that their value is in what God thought about them and not in their wealth or their position or their power. Apparently, at least one guy in the crowd had not been paying attention to Jesus. Imagine that, somebody at church not paying attention. He was not paying attention to Jesus, and so he comes up, and we're going to pick up the story. Luke tells us about it in Luke 12. He says this, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus had just said, don't worry about wealth, and the first question out of this guy's mouth, or request, is, my brother owes me money. Divide the inheritance. I mean, really, did he not hear anything Jesus had just said? So Jesus taught him another lesson. Luke tells us what happened in verse 14. It says, Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Any of you ever hear of a guy by the name of Steve Jobs? You know, founder of Apple, you know, that Steve Jobs. A few years ago, Steve Jobs had died. His brand is still going on. If you look all around the world, there are Apple products all around the world. I mean, you know, I got 2 of them right here. You know, so Apple products are everywhere. Whenever his brand and his product, it went all over the place. I mean, people are buying it everywhere. I mean, whenever he died, he had made a lot of money. Does anybody here know how much of his wealth he left behind? There you go. Y'all are paying attention. That's great. He left all of it. If someone would have written a check and put it in his coffin, it would still be in his coffin. All right, he didn't cash it in. He left all of his wealth behind. And Jesus was telling those who were listening to him that greed and the abundance of possessions means nothing. You've heard me say before, he who dies with the most toys is still dead. You see, you should not define your life by what you own or what you don't own. See, our true value is God's estimate of what we're worth and not what people think that we are worth. Other people evaluate us and place us in these categories based on how we perform or what we accomplish or how we look or how much money we have. They put us in these different categories. If you don't believe that, listen to a campaign speech by anybody. They talk about the middle class, the 1%, or the upper class. They talk about people living in poverty. They talk about them like where they are defines who they are. So to help get this message across for the 3rd time, Jesus teaches a lesson. And let's pick up that story in verse 16. It says, and he told this parable. The ground of a certain man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich towards God. See, Jesus is using this parable to tell this man that his focus is on the wrong things. Jesus wanted him to know that wealth could not last and will not last, and it could not bring him contentment and peace. But the problem is, the rich man forgot where his wealth came from. That's the first thing I want to talk to you about. The rich man forgot where his wealth came from. Did you notice how many times the rich man talked about himself in the story? I know you have the scriptures that are there on your handout, and you read them here, but go back and read them again. Look a little deeper and look at how many times he says, I and me and my. He says, I have no place to store my crops. I will store my surplus of grain, and I'll say to myself, self, that part he didn't say, but, self, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. The man in the story never acknowledged where the blessings of the big crop came from. His focus was only on himself and what he had accumulated. He never focused on the source of his blessings. Listen, without God, the man in the story would have nothing. That goes for heathen or saint. Without God, you've got nothing. No matter how hard this man would have worked, he could not make the seeds grow that he planted. No matter what he did, the growth of the crop and the amount harvested was never dependent on him. It's totally, completely dependent on God. See, I think we all need to pause for a minute. We all need to remember where our blessings come from. We need to remember where what we have has come from. See, there's no blessing in our lives we cannot trace back to God. There's not a single blessing in our lives that we cannot trace back to Him. No matter what good thing that we have enjoyed, it is all because of God's grace and His mercy and His provision it's all because of that we have anything. Every single blessing is a direct result of God's blessings on us. Every single blessing. No matter how little you have or no matter how much you have, whatever resources, whatever blessings you have received, we have all received them only because of God. And I know you may be saying, well, Pastor Jimmy, just a minute. Hold on. You see, Pastor Jimmy, I work for all I got. I go out and I earn my money to buy my stuff. I earn this. Let me ask you a question. Or let me tell you something, then I'll ask you a question. You could not do what you do if it were not for God. Who do you think gave you the knowledge of how to do your work? You say, well, I went to school. Well, who do you think put the people in the classroom to teach you stuff you didn't know? Who do you think gave you the mental capacity to be able to understand how to do the work that you do? Who do you think gave you the ability and the skills to do the work that you do? Who gave you the physical ability in order to sustain yourself and give you energy in order to do the work that you do? Listen, it all is traced back to God. You can do the same thing in your marriage. You can do the same thing with your children. You can do the same thing with your grandchildren. You can do the same thing with anything. Everything you have that is good came from God. Everything. But we need to also know something. While the man forgot where his blessings came from, we need to realize that our blessings are not just for us. In the story of the rich man, he decided to take all of his abundance and keep it for himself. He had no concern for what others might need. He had no concern about anybody else. He decided to take everything that he had and all he had accumulated, and instead of giving it to someone else, what he did is he decided to build bigger barns in order to hold more stuff. See, storage units are not new things. He was doing it back then. He was trying to get more and more stuff crammed into his buildings. He only thought of himself. Used to be a magazine out. I hadn't seen it in a while. I don't know how many magazines are still out, but it may be online. It was this magazine called Leadership Magazine. And in Leadership Magazine, it carried a story about 4 young men. They were young Bible college students, and they had rented a house together. And one Saturday morning, somebody knocked on the door, and when they opened it up, they looked at this rough-looking, dirty-looking old man standing before them. His eyes were kind of marbleized, and he had a silvery stub of whiskers all over his face. His clothes were very ragged and torn. His shoes didn't match. In fact, they were both for the same foot. He carried a wicker basket full of very unappealing vegetables and asked the boys if they wanted to buy some. Well, the boys felt sorry for the guy, and they bought some of his vegetables to help him out, and then he went on his way. And then from that time on, every Saturday he would come back. He'd knock on their door every Saturday morning and with his basket of vegetables. And as the boys got to know him, they began to inviting him in to visit for a while before he would go on to sell the rest of his vegetables. And they soon discovered that the reason his eyes were marbleized was not because of drugs or alcohol, it's because he had cataracts. They then learned that he lived just down the street from them in some old shack, and they not only learned that, they also found out he could play the harmonica. And one of the favorite things he liked to play, he loved to play old Christian hymns, and he just loved to do that. And then they found out he really loved God so much. So every Saturday, instead of just saying hello to him and buying some vegetables, they would invite him in, and he would play the harmonica, and they would sing together, and they would just have a good old time. They became such good friends, and these 4 boys, they wanted to do something to bless this man. They wanted to help him out because his clothes were ragged, his shoes were the same, 2 of the same foot shoes. I mean, he just had so much going on. They wanted to try to help him out. So they secretly collected several boxes of clothes and shoes and all this kind of stuff, and they collected it all. And one evening, or one early one morning before the man got up, they went down and they set these boxes on his doorstep. No note or anything. Well, the following Saturday, the man came by as usual, and he came in, and in the middle of all their singing and praising, he suddenly said to them, "God is so good." And the boy said, "Yes, God is so good." And then he went on, he said, "You know why he's so good?" And the boy said, "Why?" And he said, "Because yesterday," he said, "when I got up and opened my door, there was a box full of clothes and shoes and gloves and coats and all of this stuff they were just on my front door. God is so good." And the boys kind of secretly smiled at each other, and they said, "Yeah, God is so good." The old man said, "Do you know why he's so good?" And the boy said, "Well, you already told us why he's so good. Is there more?" And the old man said, "Yes." He said, "I found a family who could use those things, and I gave them all away." There's nothing wrong with saving money. Listen, you need to hear this. There's nothing wrong with saving money. There's nothing wrong with planning for retirement. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I think, as a matter of fact, I think that's being wise to plan for retirement. But if that is our reason for acquiring stuff, we are short-sighted. If it's just for us, we are so short-sighted. Listen, we are blessed in order to be a blessing to others. We are blessed in order to be a blessing to others. You remember what happened to the rich man in the story? I'm going to tear down barns and build bigger ones. Luke tells us what happened to him. He said, but God said to him, you fool, this very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. God is not against planning for retirement. He's not. But He's against being selfish. You see, focusing only on today causes us to lose sight of eternity. Anita and I have a dear friend whose husband passed away a few years ago. The husband was in a profession, he was called into this profession to help people. In his profession, he didn't make very much money. I mean, he wasn't the six-figure kind of guy, But he was helping people. He helped more people than I can count. And even though he wasn't making very much money and they didn't live a very extravagant lifestyle, I mean, he even built their house so that they lived in a house that was, didn't cost them any monthly mortgage. He worked and built their house. So, they were wise with their resources. And even though they didn't make a lot of money, and he didn't make a lot of money, they managed it well. They invested what they could. They were wise in their income, and they did quite well. As a matter of fact, when the husband died, he had left his wife with everything she needed in order to be taken care of for the rest of her life. She shared with us, she said, I've got all that I need. I don't need anything else. I don't worry about a thing. But he also left her something else, and I didn't know about this. He left her a substantial amount of money that is invested that draws several $1,000s of income every year. And he called that account God's money. Now, this is separate from her other resources she has. This is what he called God's money. And I've never heard of that before. I love that phrase, that thought, that planning behind that. But what his wife does is every year, whenever the income comes in off of that, several $1,000s comes in off of that investment, she takes every penny of that and gives it away. She takes it and she talks to God about what God would have her to do and which ministry or helping organization or agency would that she could give to help out. And so she gives it away. She doesn't keep any of that money for herself. Listen, her husband's generosity continues even after his death. You see, if we are only living for ourselves, we're too short-sighted. We all need to realize that we need to change our focus and begin to look at what we can do with our lives and our resources that's going to outlive us. We all need to have an eternal perspective because we don't know how long we have on this earth. This rich man in the story, he hoarded everything for himself and he died right after he did that. It wasn't the hoarding that killed him. He died. He didn't know when his last time was going to be. He was just protecting everything for himself. Like I said, saving and planning for retirement before we die, that's wise. But neglecting life after death is disastrous. Are you putting your hope in your possessions, or are you putting your hope in Jesus Christ? You see, if you accumulate wealth only to enrich yourself with no concern of helping others, you're living life far too short-sighted. How do we think about our blessings? How are we looking at that? Are they just for us, or are we looking for some way to help others with what God has given us? How are we thinking about our possessions? Are they tools for us to use to help others, or are they something just to pad our pocketbook and let us gain more toys? So what I want us to do today is I want us to go to a new land of Ur. The land of one another. You see, get this. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes hated each other. In Jesus' day, they could not stand each other. They hated each other. Do you know the one thing that united them? Their hatred of Jesus. That's the one thing that brought them together. Why? The reason they hated Jesus so much is because Jesus came teaching against things that were going against the land of Ur that they lived in. The land of more power and and becoming wealthier. And Jesus was teaching against that. As a matter of fact, listen, over the years, the Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribes, they'd put together over 630 different laws for you to follow if you want to be in God's good graces. Here's 639 laws you got to follow to do it. And so one day a legal expert comes up to Jesus, and he's an expert in the law. He knew all of these laws. He knew what every one of them were about. And so he comes up to Jesus and he says, Jesus, which one is the greatest law? Now, I'm not exactly sure, but I believe what he was doing is he was asking Jesus which of his 639 should be at the top. What should be number one? Jesus didn't pick one of his laws. I love it. I love it. He was totally changing everything. He was totally trying to get them to look at life in a different way. Listen to what he said in the answer to his question in Matthew 22. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. He said, that's the first and the greatest commandment. And then he gives the guy something he didn't ask for. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then he really freaks the guy out. He said, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. He didn't even mention the 639 laws the guy had. He said, these are the two. Everything else hangs on these two. Love God with all you got and love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus takes it a further step. Jesus redefined who our neighbor is and how we are to treat him. Listen, your neighbor is anyone who has a need that you can meet even if you don't like them. Hello. Did you notice Jesus did not put a qualifier on who you're supposed to love? He said, love your neighbor. You see, Jesus set the example. Notice what John, I love this, what John writes. John picks up this part of the story. He says this, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. The definition of following Jesus Christ, he says, the definition of if you want to be known as my follower, then you need to love one another. And then Paul, he takes it up another notch. Paul invites us to begin acting like Christ would act. I want you to notice what Paul writes in Ephesians. He says this. He says, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other. Now, catch those next two words. Just as in Christ God forgave you. Just like God forgave you, you forgive others. Just like God forgave me, I am to forgive others. Now, let's take it up another notch. In Ephesians 5, Paul again is writing this. He says, follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love. Check out those next two words. Just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God, we are to act just as Christ would act. Then here's one more step. To the church in Philippi, Paul writes, in your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. What did Jesus say to God about the ones who were nailing him to the cross? Anybody? Forgive them. That's right. Forgive them. God, they don't know what they're doing. Forgive them. I'm sorry, if somebody was pulling my shoulder out of joint to nail a nail in my wrist, that's probably not the prayer I would have. I'd have a prayer. It wouldn't be that one. It probably would be like, God, get him! But if I want to be like Jesus, I am to forgive those who hurt me. Now, granted, nobody's stretching my arms out of socket in order to nail me to a cross. But people have done things to me who have hurt me. They've done things to my family who have hurt my family. And God said, if I want to be like Jesus, I am to forgive them. So just like Jesus, in the land of one another, we need to forgive one another. We need to accept one another. We need to care for one another. We need to encourage one another. We need to restore one another. We need to bear with one another. We need to carry one another's burdens. We need to love one another. This is the land of we need to be living in. This is where we need to go. Love one another. Forgive one another. Bear with one another. Help one another. And you can add your part to the part. But Jesus said, if you're going to be like me, this is the things that I did. And he says, if you're going to be just as I am, Jesus said, this is where you need to live. We're in the middle of this coronavirus outbreak. And we've seen the jokes that have been out there, and I've laughed at them, made a few of them myself. Talked about, if you have 144 rolls of toilet paper for 2 weeks, the virus is probably not your biggest problem. You may need to see a different kind of doctor. Just saying. I've done all of that. But you know what I've been thinking about? Right now is the perfect time. It's the perfect time for Christ's followers to step up and show others the land of one another. Do you have a neighbor or a friend who needs someone just to listen to them? What about that person who is so panicked right now, and I've talked to several, and who are living in fear because of all they have heard about the virus? Are we laughing at them? Or are we trying to bring them comfort and hope? What about those who are on the front lines? What about our leaders who are doing their best, making decisions on the fly with the best knowledge that they have? What about the folks at the CDC? What are we doing for them? Are we praying for them? I mean, what are we doing to help out them? How are we praying for them? Are we just sitting around complaining about them? Are we praying for them? Are we complaining about the politicians who are trying to help? Are we praying for them? What are we doing? How are we being like Christ? How are we carrying people to this land of Ur? Do you know somebody you can take a meal to? How about somebody who's so afraid to get out that they may need you to shop for them? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to step out of your little box and invite somebody to come to church? Listen, they may be waiting on you to invite them, and they may say yes. Have you thought about the kids who are dependent on that breakfast and lunch that they get at school, who otherwise are not going to get anything to eat for the next 2 weeks? Have you thought about them? Oh, Pastor Jimmy, I'm not the government. I'm not supposed to do that. Yes, you are, because you're supposed to be in the land of Ur. We're not to wait on some handout from the government. We are to be the hands of Jesus. It's not our job to sit in judgment over their parents while they don't have a good paying job. It's our job to minister to those who are hurting. Have you thought about all the medical personnel and all the first responders, those people who are going to go? And, our firemen, men and women, they get called to take care of more health care issues and to meet the ambulance at somebody's house more than they fight fires. Have you thought about those who are having to meet folks in the ER where there's a whole host of germs and they have to go in there every day? They have to draw blood. They have to take temperatures. They have to clean up in there. They have to wash everything down and mop everything up. They have to have the medical knowledge to try to help somebody to the next thing. They have to do the x-rays. They have to do all of this kind of stuff. Have you thought about praying for them? I want you to think about it. Our medical personnel and all these folks, they are where this virus is coming to. They have a lot higher likelihood of being around it than you and I. We need to take people to this land of Ur. We need to think about others. We need to love others. As Christ's followers, we are called to live in the land of one another. Is it time you've moved there? Will you pray with me? Oh God, we need your help so much in our lives today. We need to go to the land of Ur ourselves, the land of one another. We need to figure out how we can love people better, how we can help people more. We need to start being as Christ was. We need to be, if we're going to say we're Christ's followers, then let's follow him. Maybe you're here today and you're not a Christ follower and you want to be one. You want to follow Jesus and then and have him help direct your life and guide your life, and you want to just give your life to him and invite him in. That's who you are. I want to help you with that. I want you to pray this very simple prayer, and you can remember it with these 4 words. So just pray this prayer just between you and God. The first word is sorry. God, I'm sorry for what I've done wrong. I'm sorry that I have not lived for you as I should. I'm sorry that I've sinned. I'm sorry I've rejected you up to this point in my life. The next word is please. Please forgive me of my sins. Please come into my life and save me. And please become the Lord of my life. The last word is 2 words are thank you. Thank you, Lord, for loving us. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for being there for me even whenever I pushed you away. Thank you for a new life I found in you. Father, for those who have prayed this prayer in minute for the first time, I pray that you would strengthen them in their walk for you. Help them to look to you. Help them to follow you and focus on being the man and woman that you want them to be and being the young boy, young girl you want them to be. For the rest of us, Father, I pray that if we may have already been Christ followers for a while, but Lord, we have become too focused on ourselves and we have forgotten that we need to live in the land of one another. We need to be as you are, to love and forgive and care for and help one another. God, help us to go to the new land of In your name I pray.